I don't know why I keep doing this, okay? I finished one of my favorite books that I've read so far, like a month ago, with my book club. That being Steinbeck's East of Eden. And for some reason, I don't make the video until like a month and a half after. Who knows? It's not procrastination, I just forgot, okay? I have a nice hardcover here that I read out of. The dust jacket's like paper though, it's ripping, it's super old. The book without the dust jacket though is very beautiful. Like a red, kind of canvasy type thing. I don't know if I get to focus. Yeah, solid. Feels nice and weighty, like I could hit somebody over the head with this. Pretty good, so. Yeah, and speaking of being hit over the head, this book hit me over the head. This was not what I was expecting, okay? The reason we read it for book club is because one of our friends recommended it to us, and I was skeptical at first. You know, it was like historical fiction or something. I'm like, that's not my genre. I don't really like that. I like classics and sci-fi, which, I mean, it is a classic, of course, so that's part of the reason why we did end up reading it. But historical fiction is not really my thing. But maybe it is my thing now, because this was a 5-star read, 100%. And so I guess today I'm just going to walk through, kind of like, think of it like a book club discussion. I'll go through it part by part. If you didn't know, it's composed of 4 parts. I think in total it's like 500 pages, so what is that, like 120 pages per section? And I'll just go through some of the notes I took on here. They're not good notes, they're just some, kind of like questions or things to chat about for the book club, so maybe get you thinking about it. And fair warning, I'm just going to spoil everything. So if you're planning on reading the book and you haven't, please don't watch this. Click away. Mute me. Exit the channel or your browser or whatever. Okay? Because I will be spoiling the entire book. So East of Eden starts in the Salinus Valley, or Salinus, or it totally depends how you say it. I don't know. Salinus. Who knows? Okay, I'll probably mess it up and get it wrong and switch it throughout the video. So you can type a hate comment below. That'd be great. Yeah, so on the first page we get sort of a contrast between the 2 mountain ranges in which the valley sits, being the Santa Lucias and the Galvins. I don't know if I want to read that section out to you, or if I'll just summarize it, but anyways, here Steinbeck writes, I remember that the Galvin Mountains to the east of the valley were light gay mountains full of sun and loveliness, and a kind of invitation, so that you wanted to climb into their warm foothills almost as you wanted to climb into the lap of a beloved mother. They were beckoning mountains with a brown grass love. The Santa Lucias stood up against the sky to the west, and kept the valley from the open sea, and they were dark and brooding, unfriendly and dangerous. I always found in myself a dread of west and a love of east. So, right off the rip, Steinbeck here is creating a contrast between dark or evil and light or good, right? Which is kind of like the most cliche or like age-old trope you can get, like good versus evil, right? But there's a reason that people keep writing about it thousands of years later. Or, not that this book was written 1,000 years ago, but you know, the mythology of our human species has been the same for the longest time, right? Because human nature does not change. Human nature is the same over all time periods, which is why we get timeless classic works like Steinbeck, right? So, I mean, he's touching on a very common trope here, good versus evil, but of course, how can you not write a compelling book? How can you write a compelling book without not touching on that? So, anyways, he's setting us up here, and the Salinus Valley, where everything is taking place, sits between these 2 mountain ranges, right? The good and the evil. So he's kind of setting up a dichotomy, but also at the same time kind of showing how in real life maybe things are in sort of a gray area between the 2. So it's pretty cool. We're introduced to a couple characters, well, many characters actually. There are 2 family lines, right? So you got the Hamiltons and the Trasks. The Hamiltons, they're from Ireland. The patriarch of the family being Samuel, and his wife is Liza, and they're kind of poor. They live on a farm where everything's dirt, nothing grows, but they are very good people. They're very resourceful, smart, intelligent, like they're fun to be around, lots of kids. And then we have the Trasks, which don't end up in the valley right away. They start somewhere else, but they end up in the valley, and their family is not kind of a polar opposite to the Hamiltons. The Trasks have only 2 kids. There's a broken marriage, and then there's a second remarriage, and the wife dies again, and there's just it's not a very good situation. And we're kind of in this first part, it's revealed how the patriarch of the Hamilton family, Samuel, is this sort of archetype of a good father, whereas Cyrus Trask, the patriarch of the other family line, is the archetype of like the bad or absent father. Now, if you know anything about this book, East of Eden, then you'll know that the story of Cain and Abel features very prominently multiple times throughout the work. And the first Cain and Abel situation we get is between the 2 Trask boys, right? That being Adam and Charles. Adam and Charles, which of course start with the letters A and C. Cain and Abel, right? Start with the same thing. So, Cain and Abel's story, right? If you don't remember, if you don't recall, Cain they both make sacrifices to God. Cain sacrifices grain. Abel sacrifices animals or livestock, I guess. And for some reason or another, God favors Abel and says kind of rejects Cain's gift. Cain gets jealous, kills Abel in the field, and then comes before God and says, "Oh, am I my brother's keeper?" Like that famous line there, which also comes back in the book. Pretty good. Excuse me. Yeah, so they end up getting in a big fight as the kids, Charles and I keep wanting to say Cain and Abel, but it's not. It's Charles and Adam. And Charles beats Adam within an inch of his life, and then goes to get a hatchet to finish the job, and Adam hides. And later, Charles expresses this subconscious, or he can't quite articulate what's wrong, but he's like, "Oh, something feels not right. Something feels that I didn't quite finish it." And he doesn't realize, but of course, us being the readers of the text would know that the thing that's missing is that he didn't kill his brother, like in the biblical story, right? What else did I want to talk about for section 1? I guess we could finish the summary. What happens in section 1? I mean, we're introduced to the characters. Oh man, this is the problem, right? This is the problem where I wait too long to review the book after I read it. Anyways, we'll just leave it at that. I guess I'll say a little bit more from part 1 about Cyrus. He's a military man. He served in a few small skirmishes and then was injured and so retired, but then spent the rest of his life like studying military stuff, and he got so good at like studying military history and like knowing all the stuff that he starts like writing for journals, and then the government ends up consulting him on various things, and he ends up like moving to I think it's Washington, and he makes a bunch of money, potentially fraudulently. It's ambiguous, we don't know. He ends up passing down a fortune down to Adam and Charles, which of course they split. But of course, I don't think, does that happen in part 1? I don't know, it happens at some point in the first 2 parts. We also meet this character, I think it's in part 1, of Kathy. I can double check that. Yeah, we do meet Kathy in the first section. And Kathy's a bit of an enigma, and apparently Steinbeck's got some hate about her as a character because they don't think Kathy's believable. One way that you could kind of write off that criticism is by saying that, well, she's just like a clinical psychopath. Again, we don't really know. Kathy's introduced kind of giving her whole story as a kid. She has like no emotion or feeling, and she likes manipulating people. She just kind of has fun with that. And so she, and even from like a young age, starts using her sexuality to like lure people and get them in trouble. Like she did this with a grade school teacher, with other boys that are a few years older than her, just getting people into loads of trouble. Then she ends up burning her family house with both her parents locked inside, and just like runs away. And then, like, I don't know how old she was, maybe like 16 or 17, 18, around about. She tries to become a prostitute, and the pimp like keeps her separated because he wants to just have her for himself. And then she ends up manipulating him and like stealing money and like running away. Then he catches up with her or something and beats her again within an inch of her life. And that's kind of where we leave off for part 1, I believe. And then she's kind of like crawling towards a house. And then I believe it's in the second part where the house she crawls to when she's almost dead is Adam and Charles's farmhouse, where they pick her up, care for her, but then Adam, I guess they just have no they have no other like girls in their community or something, because he falls in love with like this totally beat up prostitute. Which, again, is it believable? I don't know. Kind of backtracking a little bit, Adam also went through a number of things. His dad forced him into the war, because Cyrus, remember, Adam's dad, he was a military man, didn't serve much, but was like very involved in the administration portion, and so he really wanted both his boys to go into the army, but he ends up only forcing Adam, not Charles. Charles stays back, works the farm. Adam's serving, but he really hates the army, but his dad makes him do it anyways. And yeah, he ends up on like enlisting a second time for a second period, because he doesn't really know what to do. He's lost in life. Then on the way back, he becomes like a hobo and like train hops and like, or is there trains yet? I don't remember. Or he's just a hobo walking around. Anyways, he gets picked up by that's right, he gets picked up by the police for being a hobo, and they put him to work on the chain gangs, which are building the railroad. Or are they just building regular roads? I don't remember. Anyways, he spends like a year in this chain gang doing hard labor, because they think he's a criminal, but he escapes and makes it back to the farmhouse with Charles, and that's when they meet Kathy. Anyways, I think I covered part 1 there. Very shoddy, patchy job, but anyways, we're moving on. Now, in part 2, what happens? We meet a new character. Okay, so after Kathy and Adam kind of fall in love with each other. Kathy's not in love with Adam because she has no feelings. She's like a psychopath. Adam falls in love with her, marries her. On their wedding night, she drugs him and sleeps with his brother, Charles, instead, which is wild. Anyways, he never even knows about Adam never knows about it. And then when she has kids later, it's ambiguous who the father is, but we'll get to that. Anyways, they move at this point with their father's fortune. Just Adam and Kathy move. Charles stays at the farm, but Adam and Kathy move to the Salinas Valley, and she's pregnant. Tries to abort the babies, fails. The doctor gets mad at her, and then she is living in this like beautiful plot of land that Adam found for them, and it's like the best in the valley or something like that. And she's just like, yeah, as soon as I'm having these kids, I'm leaving. And Adam's like, oh, you're just acting weird because you're pregnant. Like, we'll be fine. And she's just a cold killer the entire time. And yeah, so they also get this servant to help them around the house. Adam and Kathy. And this servant's name is Mr. Lee. Alright, he's a Chinese guy, a Chinese American, and he talks in Pidgin, which is like the most stereotypical, like, broken Chinese English you can imagine. And I'm just thinking, should I do a demonstration or not? I think today we'll skip it, but anyways. Yeah, so he speaks in Pidgin, but it's revealed later that it's actually a guy's. He's not stupid. He can speak English. He went to university in America and everything. He just speaks in Pidgin because he finds that people have a tough time understanding him and relating to him if he speaks like an American, because they just judge him based on his skin color, and they assume he will have broken English. So he finds it easier just to fulfill people's expectations rather than be himself, which is kind of interesting. Anyways, the Kathy gives birth, okay, and there's twins, 2 boys, and they name them, but they don't name them, so I'll get back to that for a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyways, as soon as they're born, Kathy's like, I'm taking off, just like I said I would. And Adam's like, what? No, you gotta stay. And so she shoots him in the chest with a shotgun. Or was it a pistol? Shotgun? Anyways, shoots him. Just takes off. They don't know where she went. We know where she went, because we are the omniscient readers. She goes to a nearby town and becomes a prostitute again. Because that's the easiest profession in which to manipulate people, I guess. So she really likes that. It's really fun for her, I guess. Anyways, the owner of the whorehouse that Kathy's working at, his name is Faye. And Faye becomes quite a prominent character in sections 2 and 3. And she's kind of like a mother figure for people, and most people really like her, which is interesting. Anyways, there's some Freudian stuff going on there, probably. The book doesn't investigate that, and not too much, though. It's not a huge part of the plot. Anyways, Faye, however, is a big part of the plot, just because Kathy slowly manipulates her into like being her #1 helper, and then eventually, I'm getting ahead of myself again, but ends up poisoning her, killing her. No one knows. Everyone just thought she died because she's fat, and then she takes over at the whorehouse and like has all this money now, which is pretty wild. And throughout this entire time, she's getting up to all sorts of antics and other nefarious deeds. But yeah, there's an interesting little comparison that Steinbeck makes on page 174, where he says that as the Salinas Valley is being settled by Europeans coming over, that churches and brothels are really fulfilling the same function in society, which is kind of an odd or unexpected comparison. So he says, the church and the whorehouse arrived in Far West simultaneously, and each would have been horrified to think it was a different facet of the same thing. But surely they were both intended to accomplish the same thing. The singing, the devotion, the poetry of the churches took man out of his bleakness for a time, and so did the brothels. The sectarian churches came in swinging, cocky and loud and confident. Ignoring the laws of debt and repayment, they built churches that couldn't be paid for in 100 years. The sects fought evil, true enough, but they also fought each other with a fine lustiness. They fought at the turn of a doctrine. Each happily believed all the others were bound for hell in a basket, and each of all its bumptiousness brought with it the same thing, the scripture on which our ethics, our art and poetry, and relationships are built. Yeah, so it's kind of, Steinbeck here is pointing out the utilitarian function, I suppose, of religion. Of course, if you are religious, you will believe that it's true, and so whether or not it's fulfilling a certain social function is not really as much of interest, because it's just true, you should follow it. But he's pointing out here that one of the social functions of the church, in order to help man cope with the potentially damaging or difficult times or situations they find themselves in, the church helps people cope with that. Well, so do the brothels, because they help you forget, in a certain sense, right? Especially if you go there and are consuming alcohol at the same time. So kind of a counterintuitive comparison, but I think he's right in that respect of the social function that these institutions can fulfill. So interesting there. Another thing is that after, oh man, I'm all over the place. After Kathy shoots Adam falls into this deep depression, and he just like lays in bed and like doesn't do anything, and Lee raises the kids. Now, at some point, Adam wants to put a well onto his land so he can like irrigate crops, and he's like, who's the guy to go to? And everyone is like, oh, we know this guy called Samuel Hamilton, and he's like pretty good at, well, knowing where to dig. And so that's when the two family lines finally meet each other, is with Samuel and Adam. And so they meet, and then the shooting happens, right? Kathy leaves, Lee's raising the kids, and then Samuel comes back in a year to inquire about the wells or something like that, and he discovers that from Lee that the kids don't have names yet after a year, because Adam's just like so depressed or something. I mean, no excuse, right? But that's the way it went. And so Samuel comes over, and they get to talking with Adam, and he ends up punching Adam in the face for not naming his kids. And is it warranted? Yeah, I think so. And it turns out that physical violence actually worked in this situation, and Adam kind of wakes up from his depression, and seems to get better. And they have this whole naming kind of, not ceremony, but sort of like this moment where they're naming the kids, and it's kind of like an iconic scene. And they end up naming the kids Caleb and Aaron, which, if you are astute, you will notice that they also start with the letters C and A, Cain and Abel. Sorry, we're getting this foreshadowing, or recapitulation of the mythological sort of archetype or situation of the two brothers, right? So, pretty interesting there. Another random aside, Steinbeck tends to do this. He's not as bad as Melville is for this, where they go on sort of like these like haughty digressions, but he does it from time to time, especially when he's opening a chapter at the beginning of a section. And so in chapter 13 he does this again. He's talking about the individual free human mind versus the collective, right? Which is, I guess, a little bit like 60 years too soon, but it's kind of foreshadowing, I guess, like the rise of communism. Or maybe it's not too soon, is it? Because Second World War was fascism. Communism is Cold War. My history is so bad, guys. Anyways, it is anyways before the rise of communism in the Eastern Europe. So, but I don't know if that's what his point was in writing that in. Anyways, no matter. Let's talk about it. Page 105 for me, chapter 13. Your page numbers are probably different. Steinbeck writes, "Our species is the only creative species, and it has only one creative instrument, the individual mind and spirit of a man. Nothing was ever created by two men. There are no good collaborations, whether in music, in art, in poetry, in mathematics, in philosophy. Once the miracle of creation has taken place, the group can build and extend it, but the group never invents anything. The preciousness lies in the lonely mind of a man." Now, if you have ever listened to Migos, you know this is false. Anyways, yeah, hot take there from Steinbeck. I tend to agree with him. I mean, like, I do think that people can work together well and do collaborative projects, but the kernel of an invention, the key idea, is always generated by a single individual. And in a project that requires multiple key ideas, sometimes different key ideas come together from different people, but each individual key idea is always from a single person, and I think that's the point he's trying to make here. And so I would probably agree with that. I would say, yeah, it's probably a good one. So yeah. What else do I have for this section? Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty much it. Oh yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Liza and Samuel. So Samuel, he's not scatterbrained, but he's a little bit of a visionary, right? His head's in the clouds a lot of times. And he's a really good dad, right? He takes care of his family. He spends time with his kids. He's personable. He doesn't get angry or anything like that. He's a nice guy. And his wife is kind of his polar opposite. She doesn't have anger issues or anything, but she's very strict and logical, and she grounds him, right? And there's this really interesting section. I don't know if it's in part 2 or part 3. It talks about how Liza's like, oh, you got to read your Bible, and it doesn't matter if you understand it, because if God would have wanted you to understand it, he would have let you understand it. All your job is just to read it and to follow it. And as dogmatic as that sounds, I don't know. It's kind of a good take. I think, like if you're convicted and you've made the decision to be a Christian, then it sometimes doesn't matter. Like, it's good to understand, but that's not the key point, right? Understanding is like the cherry on top. The meat and the potatoes is just that you do it. But perhaps this is more of like an Old Testament ethos. Maybe the New Testament ethos is to understand and to apply liberally, I guess. Who knows? But I just thought that was funny. So anyways, one of the discussion questions we talked about in book club was, well, why does the marriage work then if he's like so much of a visionary and kind of a free spirit and she's so strict? But I guess they complement each other quite well, right? I don't know who said this, but in order for there to be attraction, there has to be polarity or difference, right? And so perhaps that's why the marriage works, because they complement each other. Interesting, either way. Where are we here? Moving on to section 3, or part 3, if you will. So in section 3, we see Caleb and Aaron grown up. Not grown up, but growing up. And we learned kind of a little bit more about, the kids, obviously, and the discussion of their unknown paternity comes up, which is obviously of concern. Although Adam has an interesting response to this on page 264, which I don't have the chapter reference for. Anyways, I'll be there in a jiffy. So Charles is talking with, Adam is talking with Kathy, which we'll get into how that happened in a second, so I'm getting ahead of myself here. But anyways, Kathy is basically telling him, hey, I drugged you and slept with your brother, just so you know that, because she's trying to manipulate him, get in his head, right? And so he's trying to come to terms with it. He's very drunk. And then he said, Steinbeck writes, Adam closed his eyes and his head reeled with the rum. He opened his eyes and shook his head violently. He's responding to Kathy's statement about sleeping with his brother. It wouldn't matter, even if it were true. He said, it wouldn't matter at all. And suddenly he laughed because he knew that it was so. So, super interesting. He ends up not forgiving, I guess, but he kind of lets go of that past situation, right? Because he can't change it. Well, how did Adam come to meet Kathy? Anyways, I believe Samuel knew, just through talking with various people. So he put 2 and 2 together, and he ends up telling Adam. And it's a hard decision, obviously, because it could wreck him. I mean, remember, Adam just came out of his long 1-year stupor. So is it wise to tell him? It could break his brain. He goes for it. And he ends up, going to the brothel where Kate works. They have this whole discussion. And, he ends up letting go, getting over it, which is great. We also hear more about the dynamic between Aaron and Charles. Aaron and Caleb. Interestingly enough, both of the boys have their names changed, right? Caleb becomes Cal, and then Aaron spells his name with only 1 A, even though he was named with 2 A's. So both of the boys changed their name for some reason. And then we learn that Aaron is more of a soft-spoken, careful, thoughtful boy, whereas Cal is more of the rough and tumble, more bull in a china shop kind of thing. They give a really good dichotomy, I guess, or comparison between the 2 kids, where Aaron would sit and stare at the anthill for an hour, just watching the ants go about their day, And Cal, if he saw an anthill, would just step on it and kick the ants around and then leave. So, pretty funny. I mean, most of the kids that I knew growing up would probably kick the anthill. But hey, every once in a while you get an Aaron, right? So, I mean, Steinbeck in section 3 is asking the readers to compare the dynamic between Cal and Aaron to that of Cain and Abel. Now, if you take the first letters as any indication, you would expect that the C is the Cain and the A is the Abel, which ends up being correct. So your intuition would be correct in that case. They also, because Kathy's now working at the whorehouse under a fake name Kate, they're growing up without a mom, right? So their dad is absent, not as good of a dad as he could be, and Lee is basically raising the kids, right? So they don't have a mom. So, yeah, at the end of the section, I'm getting ahead of myself. My timeline is all screwed up, okay? Guys, that's inevitable. It's been like a month and a half since I read the book. My timeline's all messed up. Anyways, they do end up moving out of Salamis, or no, within Salamis, but they move from the country to where they have been staying on that nice plot, and they move into the city, which is where the whorehouse is, where Kate is. So, setting us up in section 4 for a bit of a disaster, right? We also learn more about Samuel's kids. So he has like a whole bunch of kids, and sometimes they have like a chapter or two like on each kid, and then it moves on, right? There's a chapter on, I think it's Olive, her name is, or something like that. Anyways, and then it just kind of drops the thread. But we learn a little bit more. One of the kids we learn more about, his name is Tom. Now, Tom's a great uncle to his nieces and nephews. He's really just like a thoughtful, poetic guy. One of his brothers, I'm forgetting the name now, but is super into business, right? He's like the jewel of the family because no one else can make money really, but he's like a good businessman. But Tom isn't really like that. He's into poetry and he's soft-spoken, and he's super depressed as well. And when one of his sisters loses her husband, they kind of move in together, and they have this great brother-sister moment. They're really just both their lives are in ruin, but they're kind of building each other up, right, getting along. And then the sister has some stomach problems and dies. But as she's dying, he tries to like save her life with like these pills. And then the doctor reveals that, hey, the pills actually made it worse, and so he blames himself for her death, even though it's not really his fault. He just tried to help. And so that kind of pushes him over the edge. And so he's driven to commit suicide, but he knows that his mother, Liza, is super strict about like the Bible, which suicide they think would put you into hell because it's a sin, right? Do not murder. Murdering yourself, sin, right? And so in that case, he wants to make his suicide look like an accident. So he sends, he doesn't know what to do. And then he's in the farmhouse alone, and he has a vision where he sees Samuel, his dad, and his dad is like, "You're a smart boy, Tom, you know what to do." And then he opens the drawer and finds an envelope and a piece of paper. And then he tells his mom, "Hey, I just bought a horse. It's really crazy. I'm going to try to tame it tomorrow." And then he writes a letter to his business brother and says, "Hey, there is no horse." And then he tells him, "Tell Mom that I got trampled by the horse," or something like that. And then the final line from that chapter, anyways, I think hit most of us pretty hard. I don't know where this is. I didn't write a page number for it. I should have. Anyways, it says something like, "And he was a gallant gentleman." And that kind of is like a weird sentence maybe to associate with somebody who just committed suicide, but it just goes to show, I think Steinbeck there is talking about Tom's character as a person, like how sensitive and empathetic and soft-spoken he is as a person. He just cares so much about other people that he doesn't want them to know the truth about how he's feeling or what he's done to himself. And so they're just saying like he's such a gentleman for trying to make everyone's life better around him, even though his was unbearable. So yeah, most of us felt pretty bad for Tom, even though he's not really a major character in the book. Another thing that comes up in this section is one of the most recurring concepts throughout the book. And if you read this book in high school, you 100% wrote an essay on this. And that's the concept of Timshel. So the story behind that is that it is from the Bible story of Cain and Abel, and it supposedly is the Hebrew word for well, we don't know, right? So Lee, he thinks it's the key to the Cain and Abel story, and he takes it to some like Chinese scholars on the East Coast or something like that, and they spend like 6 months, or I don't even know how long, a few months, studying the Hebrew just so they can figure out what this one word means. And the translation they end up coming up with is "thou mayest." And the context of that word in the verse is that God is saying, "thou blank over sin." So "thou Timshel over sin," and they're not really sure what it means, but if it's "thou mayest," that means that people have a choice, right? And that's the concept of the book, right? You can choose between good and evil. So Steinbeck's making a statement about free will here, right? Because if the Bible verse said, "thou must rule over sin," or "thou wilt rule over sin," then there's no choice element in there. But if it says "thou mayest," then it's the choice is up to each individual to make that decision. And so Samuel really likes Timshel. And I've got some excerpts here we can read out loud together. I'm not sure which one I'm going to choose. We got one on 246 here. Well, that's the one I kind of just talked about, explaining the "thou mayest" thing, so we'll skip that one. So here's Lee talking about "thou mayest." He says, "Thou mayest rule over sin, Lee." Oh, sorry, this is Samuel talking, not Lee. "Thou mayest rule over sin, Lee. That's it. I do not believe all men are destroyed. I can name you a dozen who are not, and they are the ones who the world lives by. It is true of the spirit as it is true of battles. Only the winners are remembered. Surely most men are destroyed, but there are others who, like pillars of fire, guide frightened men through the darkness. Thou mayest, thou mayest. What glory! It is true that we are weak and sick and quarrelsome, but if that is all we ever were, we would, millenniums ago, have disappeared from the face of the earth. A few remnants of fossilized jawbone, some broken teeth in strata of limestone, would be the only mark man would have left of his existence in the world. But the choice, Lee, the choice of winning, I had never understood it or accepted it before. Do you see now why I told Adam tonight? I exercised the choice. Maybe I was wrong, but by telling him I also forced him to live or get off the pot. What is that word, Lee? Timshel, said Lee. So that word is super touching to Samuel, and it also recurs as a theme throughout the book. So yeah, it's important. Anyways, one of the things that's interesting though, if you think about Kathy, is that Steinbeck several times throughout the book alludes to Kathy as like a genetic psychopath, right? So, I'm not sure if Steinbeck is just saying this as the narrator or if it's Samuel or somebody that says it, but they talk about how, well, people can be born with physical aberrations, right? Like cleft palate, or perhaps they are missing an arm or something like this. So why wouldn't people be able to be born with an aberration or a deformity in their brain? So basically saying that it's like a genetic inevitability that Kathy is a psychopath, right? And you can debate this or that about free will, but the idea of Timshel coming up in the book, I mean, I don't think it's ever explicitly associated with Kathy, but it begs the question to the reader, well, does Kathy have a choice, or is it just a genetic inevitability, right? Does Kathy have free will? Because she's just utterly broken as a person, unable to emotionally connect. And it's alluded to many times throughout the book how she knows something is missing, but she doesn't know what it is, or she is unable to like put herself in another person's shoes. She can't love. Something's missing. She doesn't know what it is. But then, of course, does she have that same choice as the other people in the book? We're not sure. Anyways, yeah. Also in this section, I talked about it before. Kathy and Adam meet up, and they meet up twice, I believe. I'm getting my timeline mixed up. Anyways, at some point during meeting, Kathy tries to entice Adam again and manipulate him again, but Adam resists it. And I don't think it explicitly says why, but I mean, it's heavily alluded to. And the reason that Adam is able to resist Kathy is because she's grown older. her beauty and innocence have faded, and they don't impact him the same way. It's said several times that she has mottled skin, fat ankles, like monkey's paw hands or something like that, like kind of stringy hair. Like she's not as beautiful as she used to be, and so he's kind of repulsed by her, and he realizes like the facade or the thing he fell for at first is not the same, and he's able to distance himself from that, and yeah, is able to resist her temptation or wiles or whatever word you want to use, her snares. Anyways, she's a terrible person, and good on you, Adam, for making that connection. But the way he makes that connection is just odd. It's because of a lack of physical attraction, which, hey, it worked for him, so good for him. Also, it's revealed that Charles has died, and so his half of the fortune comes to Adam now. But the problem is that Charles said, hey, split the fortune, or my half of the fortune, between Adam and his wife. So technically, Kathy gets a quarter of the original Cyrus fortune. So, dubious situation, right? Should Adam notify Kathy about the situation? Or should he not? And then he actually is a good guy. He's up front with her. He's like, hey, Charles died. You can claim your quarter of the portion. You just got to write a letter. And she's like all suspicious of him. She's like, what's your plan? Like, what are you trying to trick me or something? He's like, no, money's yours. And he just like, he's so nonchalant about it, which again, good for him. It's the right thing to do. Yeah, that's the last note I wanted to make on section 3. Section 4, moving on. My notes are all over the place here. So, there's a lot of weird things that happen in section 4. Aaron is dating this girl from the neighborhood Abra. They're quite serious. They kind of are like childhood best friends. So it's kind of cute. Cal meets Kate, and he's horrified, obviously, at what he sees. He understands a lot about what happened to his dad and everything like that. And then I'm skipping ahead quite a bit here, but I'll just say it. Aaron is much more sensitive. He doesn't want to know what happened to his mom. He thinks she's still living somewhere far away, in a different country or something or in a different state. And Cal breaks the news to him, takes him to see Kate, and he kind of flips and like goes crazy and like enlists in the army and like runs away. And this is again pushing forward towards the end of the book, but so I'm jumping ahead and I'll have to go back in a second. But while he's serving in the army, Aaron is killed in battle, and because Cal's the one that revealed to him the truth about Kate and he ran away and got killed, Cal feels responsible, and then we get this recapitulation of the Cain and Abel story, right? I mean, it wasn't Cal's fault directly that his brother got killed, but just like Tom, he feels responsible for that death, right? So, and then also something interesting is that before Aaron leaves, Kate wills her quarter of the fortune to Aaron, which is super interesting psychologically. My take on it, anyways, is that because Aaron's like the thoughtful, like innocent kid, whereas Cal's like the rough and tumble kid, like I was saying before. So when Kate meets Aaron, he's everything she's not, right? He is like an empathetic, like soft-spoken kid who like goes to church and like tries to do everything the right way, and she's like wicked and deceitful. And as she's aging, she kind of realizes like, hey, I can't keep this up forever. I've got to like move to Europe with all my money and like try to live a little bit cleaner. But she still loves manipulating people, and she's still a terrible person, even though she in her brain is just tactical, right? Like the moving to Europe thing, she just doesn't want to repent and start a new life. She just wants to be safe in Europe, right? So she's not really, I'm not really sure it's like a redemption thing, but she wills her fortune to Aaron, and I almost think it's sort of her way of like compensating. She's kind of proud that one of her kids is like doing the right thing, kind of, and she just like, she doesn't exactly know why, but she just wills all the money to him, which I don't know, super interesting. I'm sure somebody else has their own take on why she did that, but so obviously when Cal finds out about that Kate's his mom, it creates a lot of tension for him because he also feels this pull between good and evil. Like, he always feels that he's a bad person, and now that he's met his mom, he's like, well, now I know, and he blames it, like, hey, the reason I'm a bad person is because I have some of my mom in me, and she's like completely a wicked psychopath. And he has this this section where he I'm not going to read it. It's page 364 in my copy, but he basically just blames the fact that he has badness in him, and he can't avoid it. He's just going to be bad because his mom has the same genes, like he's her kid. And Lee, who's still very much involved with the kids as they're growing up, like jumped on him right away and is like, don't say that. Like, you have a choice. And like, it just recapitulates this idea of Timshel, right? Thou mayest. He's like, you can reign over sin and like choose the right thing. Don't like come up with excuses or blame your mother or whatever this, right? So that's pretty interesting. Also, the reader is called to examine the significance of the inheritance, right? Because the initial inheritance comes from Cyrus to Adam and Charles, and then it comes again when Charles dies back to Adam, and then eventually when Adam dies, Cal inherits the fortune because Aaron died in the war, right? And so the reader it's heavily insinuated that money in the book is a symbol for generational sin, right? It starts with Cyrus and then is passed on to Adam and Charles, and again to Adam, and then again to Cal. So, I mean, it kind of fits with the biblical verse that money is the root of all kinds of evil, or all evil, depending on the translation. So, kind of a interesting symbol there that Steinbeck uses. What else do I want to talk about? Yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing that is super interesting is just how the book ends and how that interplays between the story of Cain and Abel, generational sin, and Timshel. Like that all those concepts kind of culminate in the last chapter. So Adam has a couple of strokes and is on his deathbed at the end of the book, and Aaron's dead. Cal ends up dating Abra, who was the girl that Aaron was with, and Cal is completely distraught. Obviously, his brother's dead. His dad's about to die. His life is like being torn apart. He doesn't know if he's good or evil. He's having this whole existential crisis, right? Earlier in the book, he had paired up with that Hamilton kid that was really good at making money, who's older than him. But anyways, he kind of mentors him, and they make a whole bunch of money together. And they do it by planting corn before the war. War happens. They need food. They sell the corn for more money. Now he takes that money and he gives it to his dad as an offering. He's like, Dad, I made this for you. And his dad rejects him. He's like, hey, I don't want this. I think it's insinuated that he doesn't like the fact that he profited off the war, just like his dad Cyrus did, right? Although in the case of Cyrus, it was probably fraudulent money, where with Cal it was legitimate money. He just planted corn and sold it. I mean, he sold it at higher rates, but that's because the market demanded higher rates because there was a shortage, so I don't understand why that's immoral. Anyways, Adam doesn't want any of it, so he rejects the gift, which of course, going back to Cain and Abel, God rejects Cain's gift of the grain, which corn is grain, right? And the money came from corn, so there's connections all over the place. Steinbeck's doing a good job of that. And when he rejects Cal's gift, he's like, why don't you just be more like your brother Aaron, who pursues his passions and loves life? Why do you have to be conflicted about what you want to do, or why don't you just be good like your brother? And of course, Cain and Abel again. Then there's this interesting turning point in page 485. So I'll explain a little bit more about it. So when Abra was first dating Aaron, when they were kids, they used to go under the willow tree and play house, and I don't know if they would as kids they would kiss or just pet each other's hair or something like that. Anyways, they were pretending to be married or something. And on page 485, now Aaron's dead, Abra reveals that she has feelings for Cal. They're dating. Anyways, Cal, this is like the highest point in the book, the climax. I learned that in junior high. The climax of the story. Is it the climax? If you ask me, perhaps. This is where Cal is like the most emotionally distraught, doesn't know what to do, and he offers for Abra, like, let's just run away. And he asks Abra, don't you want to go with me? And she says, not if you're running away. No, I don't. Cal said, then I don't know what to do. What shall I do? Tell me what to do. And she says, will you listen? He says, I don't know. She says, we're going back, she said. He says, back where? To your father's house, Abra says. And that's the end of the chapter, or chapter section. Anyways, sorry, I skipped ahead of myself. The place they're running away to is a willow tree. And so there's this like weird like dichotomy, I guess, between going back to the father or like going to the willow tree, which would symbolize, at least based on what happened previously in the story, it symbolizes like the feminine or the mother or something like this. I don't know. You could ask Jung. He'd probably know. But there's this interesting dichotomy, and then she actually helps him. She redirects him back to the father, which is very interesting. Biblical symbolism all over there. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but it stuck with me for sure. Anyways, at the very end, Adam's on his deathbed. He's basically incoherent. He can't speak. He's like he got stroked so bad they don't even know if he can hear them. He's just lying in the bed, unresponsive. And Lee brings Cal in front of Adam to ask for forgiveness, right? So, of course, just to outline the symbolism, Cal is like Cain, Adam is like God, and they're trying to reconcile the relationship. And so Lee brings up the fact that Adam rejected Cal with the money, and they're trying to explain, like, Adam, please, give him your blessing. Don't leave him alone with his guilt. Adam, can you hear me? Give him your blessing. And Lee says again, help him, Adam, help him. Give him his chance. Because Lee knows that if Adam does not bless Cal will go on to have a miserable life, and evil will have won in that case. But at the very end, Adam's totally unresponsive. He had multiple strokes, and then as Lee is pleading to Adam on Cal's behalf, Adam says a single word before he dies, and he says Timshel. And that's like literally the end of the book, like right at the end. I don't know if you can see that. It won't focus. Anyway, it's right at the end. And that basically is representing the break in the generational cycle of sin and choosing evil over good. And that single word that he's able to say, Timshel, acts as sort of like this blessing and this forgiveness and this acknowledgement of that Cal is good and he can choose the right thing. And it's just kind of a very beautiful moment. Anyways, if you haven't read the book and you watched this far, and you shouldn't have, I told you not to, but you should read the book anyways, even though you know what happens, because I missed a whole bunch of stuff. The writing's great. It really sucks you into the universe that Steinbeck's created. And I don't have too many 5-star reads, but this is one of them. Not my genre, but again, amazing book. So I really recommend you give it a try. Yeah, I talked for almost an hour, so we're going to wrap it up. And have a good one.